Welcome back to our training course on the Corporate Transparency Act. In this video, we are going to discuss exactly what is a beneficial owner. This is one of the two main categories that you need to report on that beneficial ownership report. This is probably, honestly, the most complicated part of the Corporate Transparency Act. It is kind of confusing, so we are going to go through several slides here where we're going to actually go through some real-life examples so you can see how we calculate this all out. Now, when you see the term beneficial owner, I want you to think ownership and control, because that's really what it breaks down to. It is ultimately going to be where you need to identify who ultimately controls and benefits from the company. So, for some reason, there we go. This is the definition of a beneficial owner. It is going to be an individual. So again, it goes to we only report individuals. So if you have a holding company and a subsidiary and then another subsidiary, if you have layers of things, maybe you have a trust that owns a company. You pierce through all of those layers to get down to who has the actual individual. So again, it's going to be the individual that owns at least 25% of a company's equity, or an individual who exercises substantial control over the company. Examples of this will be managers of LLCs, managers of companies, anyone in the C-suite, a board of directors, the trustees of a trust, or personal representatives of an estate. So this can even come into play. Remember I talked about deadlines for when there's a change in a company. Well, that can include if you have a change in any of these positions. So if you get a new manager, you get a new president, a new VP, a new treasurer, if you update your board of directors, or even if one of the owners passed away and now you're dealing with a probate, you need to report that there's been an update to that change. But this is the test that you're ultimately looking for here. Now, if you look at this image, you're going to see that we're talking about the reporting company is an LLC. Ownership interest is capital and profit interest only. And you have individual A, who is president and makes all the important decisions, and they own 100% of those capital and profit interests. In this example, this is the easiest of all of them. Individual A is who you are going to report. That's it. There is no one else in control. There is nobody else that has at least 25% interest of the company. So you'll be individual A that you will be reporting. Now let's talk about the more complicated situations that I think are fairly common. So here we go. Here's an example where we have a reporting company that is a corporation. Ownership interest of this is going to be stock. There are several important things to take note of here. We have individual D, who is the president of that corporation. You have individual A, who owns 50% of the stock, individual B that has 40% of the stock, and individual C that has 10% of the stock. So let's see who is going to be reportable. Individual A, he has 50% ownership, so yes, that exceeds 25%. He or she is going to be reportable. Individual B owns 40%, again, greater than 25%. So that individual is going to be reportable. Individual C has 10% ownership. That is not going to be reportable because they have less than 25% equity in that corporation. Individual D, he doesn't own anything, but he is the president of the company. That is going to be reportable because he has substantial control. So in this situation, we have 3 beneficial owners that need to be reported on that CTA report. Now let's go with a more complicated structure where we have a holding company that is owned by several subsidiaries, and those subsidiaries are owned by individuals. Let's call them even stocks or trusts, anything along those lines. How is this going to play out? Let's start with individual A. They are an indirect owner of the reporting company. So the reporting company here is owned 50-50 by Company Y and Company Z. Now, Company Y is owned 30% by individual A and 70% by individual B, and Company Z is owned 25% by individual A, 25% by individual C, 25% by individual D, and 25% by individual E. And then additionally, we have individual F up here that directs all the important decisions through board representation. So let's start with individual A. Individual A is marked as a CFO. That alone, we don't even need to look into the stock ownership. That by itself is a reportable individual. But let's take it another step further. How do we actually calculate individual A's ownership into the reporting company? This is especially complicated because not only do they own 30% of stock Company Y, but they also own 25% of Company Z, each company owning 50%. What we need to do here, let's start with Company Y. So 50% of the reportable company, we are going to multiply individual A's 30% ownership of Company Y. That is going to give us 15% ownership. Follow that same principle with Company Z. Again, 50% ownership of the reporting company. We multiply their 25% ownership of Company Z. That gives us a 12.5%. We are going to add those two together. That gives us 27.5%, which exceeds the 25% requirement. So even if individual A was not a reportable, was not a CFO, they are still going to be reportable because they do exceed the ownership interest requirement. So they actually meet both prongs in this example. Let's talk about individual B. No management decisions, but they do own 70% of Company Y. So 50% times 70% is 35%. They are going to be reportable because, again, that exceeds the 25% limit. Individual C, apparently I clicked too fast. Individual C is both CEO and president of the company. That alone makes them reportable. But what about the stock ownership? Well, we take the 50% ownership of Company Z and we multiply that by 25% ownership. They are at 12.5%. That doesn't meet the threshold. So if they weren't CEO and president, they would not be reportable. But considering that they are CEO and president, they are going to still be reportable at the end of the day. It's a two-pronged test. You only need to meet one of those prongs in order to be reportable. Let's talk about individual D and E. Again, they don't have any type of management experience. They have no C-suite. They are not on the board of directors. They are simply 25% ownership of the Company Z. So we multiply 50% times 25%, which gives us 12.5. Again, that is under the 25% requirement. Therefore, they are not going to be reportable. And then individual F doesn't have any ownership, but they are on the board of directors. They are going to be reportable even if they don't have any stock. So that is going to end our discussions over these examples of what a beneficial ownership is. Again, this is really helpful because it shows you how to calculate ownership even when you have indirect ownership. And you can replace any of these individuals, right? Individual A, or let's go individual B, very well might have their ownership interest through a trust. We're going to pierce through the trust, and based on individual B, the trust is going to be reportable. Now, if it's a trust, it's even more so complicated because with the trust, you have trustees and beneficiaries. So oftentimes, if it's a revocable trust, those two will be the same party, but not necessarily. But when it's dealing with the trust, you will need to report the trustee because the trustee is in control over the trust assets. And then the beneficiary is the person who actually gets to enjoy the dividends, the profits, everything along those lines. They too would be reportable. So if I was to run an example where individual B was actually a trust and because of that ownership, it is going to be reportable. you would need to report both the trustee and the beneficiary. If this is a revocable trust and they are the same individuals, you're just going to be reporting one individual. But let's say the grantor, the person who made that trust, they are incapacitated and they are no longer in control over that trust. You have two people to report. The trustee that is now in control and the beneficiary, which is going to be the grantor, the person that initially made the trust. So in that situation, you would actually have two different people to report. If you have any questions, I know this gets really complicated. If you're dealing with a structure like this, I highly recommend you work with competent legal professionals to help you with breaking this down even further. In our next video, we're going to talk about changes that can happen at the reporting company or the beneficial ownership level that may trigger a new updated report that you'll need to file. We'll see you there.